Hi everyone. I'm going to pass over to Ian Bolton. Ian is the Biodiversity and Environmental Compliance Manager for the London Borough of Lambeth and has worked in the fields of biodiversity, wildlife conservation and nature enhancement projects in parks and other open spaces for over 24 years. Ian is also the Vice Chair and Membership Secretary for the Association of Local Government Ecologists, or ALGE, which I always think is a great acronym for an ecologist-based network, which represents officers working in local government and national parks on a diverse range of landscape, ecology and nature conservation issues. So over to you, Ian.
All right, I've just been given by Ellie just 5 minutes to just do a little introduction to BNG in Practice project. And so just a little brief thing, because I can go on for a long time. But basically, the whole thing about BNGs, if you're very aware, it is about that there is now a mandatory requirement, apart from some exemptions, for at least a 10% biodiversity net gain on most developments. There are exceptions, of course, and that particularly applies to England. So rather than give you the background to BNG, so hopefully you're aware of that one. The BNG in Practice project is a joint project between the IES, EPIC and the EIA community and the Associated Local Government Ecologists. ALG, for those of you who don't know, is a membership-based organisation which represents ecologists working in the local government sector in all the 4 countries of the UK. We also include the National Parks Association as well, because they have planning powers as well. Why we're doing this project? Well, the BNG is an ambitious and new policy, I think we all agree, but it is also a key environmental delivery challenge. And there are long-standing and widespread concerns raised around the preparation, implementation, and this was included in our ALG's 2021 report. If it's available, I can obviously send it on. And although there was significant work being done by DEFRA and the Planning Advisory Service and others to prepare local authority in advance of biodiversity mandatory biodiversity again, which came into force earlier this year on the 12th of February for major developments and on 2nd of April for small sites. But it's quite clear from conversations with a wide range of members, not just IES, but also ALGE, that we've been concerned that it was not working as it should in practice. So we've started this BNG in Practice project in July to pull back the curtain, if it be said that way, and provide an understanding of what is working well and what is not working well in terms of BNG delivery. And what the project involves is we're doing this speaking to our members who are the ecologists, planners, developers, consultants who know what is going on. So asking people what's going on and what do they think. But first of all, through a survey, the results of which Ellie's going to take you through in a minute. And then second of all, through more in-depth discussions, including in this workshop and afterwards through one-to-one interviews. We're hoping the project findings, which we'll be publishing at the end of the year, will enable IES and ALGE members and others working in this area to share knowledge and best practice, which I think is quite important. And as well as of interest to provide recommendations to DEFRA in Natural England, as well as those in devolved administrations and further afield, maybe considering a similar statutory BNG policy, and that includes Scotland, Northern Ireland and Wales. So I think that's given a fairly good overview, Ellie, of what the project is, and thank you very much for contributing, everybody, and taking part.
Yeah, thanks, Ian, for that introduction to the project. So, Sian, if you just could start sharing my slides. So, in the next 10 minutes, if we go to next slide, please, I'm going to take you through the survey results that Ian mentioned. Then we're going to go into breakout rooms. So, Sian, if you just click through, the points should come up. Yeah, great. Then we'll go into breakout rooms. So start thinking now about which room you'd most like to join. And then we'll come back together about 5 minutes to 1 for a quick summary and close before breaking for lunch. So next slide, please. So a bit more information about this survey. It was open during pretty much the whole month of August. We had 142 respondents, mainly IES and ALGE members. So that's members, mainly working in planning, local ecology. Obviously, we had a lot of local government ecologists because we sent it out to ALGE members. But yeah, so next slide, please, Sian. So the kind of key results that I'm going to take you through now, to start with, I'm just going to talk about the results we got on overall, how well the policy is working in practice. And I think interesting that Tim asked Oliver, our keynote speaker, at the start of today during the Q&A, how well does Oliver think? How well does Natural England think that it's working? But we'll give our opinion. And then we'll look at the position of the gain plan and then 3 key challenges, so on-site gains, off-site gains, and monitoring and enforcement. So first of all, how well is it working? Next slide, please. Yeah, so you can see this was the results that we got from the survey. So about 2/3 of respondents thought that BNG was working at a fair, good, or excellent level. So that's what you get if you add the orange bit, the light green bar, and also the red bar together, though obviously the red bar is not, like, not many people thought it was working at that top excellent level. And approximately 1/3 thought it was working quite poorly or very poorly. So, you know, combining the darker green and the blue bar. So not bad, not bad. 2/3 thinking it's working good, fair, or excellent. And then next slide, please. So if the previous question was about how BNG is working in practice right now, you know, we're only a few months really into the policy, which was only started in full in April and for like larger sites in February. If the previous question is about how is BNG working now, this question is perhaps more about how respondents think it's going to work once the teething issues are in the way. It's kind of more asking, are you optimistic or pessimistic about how it's going to work out in the future? Is it under the current system going to contribute to better environmental outcomes? And you can see there's a good range of opinions. It's basically kind of like a normal distribution almost. Around 36% said that it would make no or small contribution, a further 36% a fair contribution, and 28% a significant or very significant contribution. So while it's pretty striking that you know, over 1/3 think BNG is going to make no or a small contribution to better environmental outcomes, certainly not the same as drastic or as worrying as some of the reports that have come out kind of since we did our survey even. So next slide, please, Sian. So for instance, this ends article with research done by a law firm kind of showing that there's mass abuse of the policy and there's just very little planning applications are actually having to go through BNG because they're just the loopholes. So it's definitely, our survey definitely didn't show this kind of mass abuse. So it's interesting to be like, you know, which is the reality? Probably somewhere between the two, but yeah, interesting to kind of think about that, I think, when you go into breakout room discussions as well. If you've had experience, if you work with BNG, which kind of how well do you think it's going? That question that Tim asked Oliver at the start. So next slide, please. So now we're going to go on to the position of the game plan, and I apologize, it's going to get a bit techie. But the next key finding was around as I said, the biodiversity game plan. So next slide. Here comes the techie bit. And sorry if you guys work in planning and already know this, but before planning permission can be granted for a development, the applicant must provide certain BNG related information, such as the pre-development biodiversity value of the site and details of any irreplaceable habitats. However, applicants don't need to provide a post-development biodiversity metric calculation, basically an estimation of what the biodiversity value will be after development. And they don't need to provide information on how they will achieve the 10% BNG gain, which is called the biodiversity game plan, this kind of plan for how they're actually going to achieve 10% BNG. They don't need to provide that to secure planning permission. It's a little more complicated than that. So the biodiversity game regulations actually state that the biodiversity game plan should not be submitted until after planning permission is granted. So you can see here on the diagram, stage 2 planning permission is granted. Stage 3, the biodiversity game plan is submitted and approved. That doesn't stop a draft biodiversity game plan or, you know, more information being submitted before planning permission. And it is, you know, seen as good practice to do so, and lots of LPAs and developers are asking and doing this, but that's not the requirement. And in fact, you can't submit the full game plan beforehand. So once planning permission has been granted, then a biodiversity game plan must be submitted and approved before development or construction can commence. So next slide. So the survey results showed confusion around where the position of the game plan in the planning process, which, having just gone through it, I think is understandable, with over 40% saying it's produced before planning permission, even though, as you know, I've just explained, that's actually not permitted. Next slide. However, there was consensus that the plan should be produced before planning permission, even though you can't currently do that. And you can see the logic for this. You know, if the plan for how biodiversity gains will be achieved does not have to be reviewed before planning permission, then what leverage does the local planning authority have to say that's not good enough, or that needs to change? It's not as strong. Obviously, it has to be approved before construction can commence, but planning permission has already been approved. So it's quite nuanced, and yeah, like I said, this one's a bit of a techie one. So next slide, please. So these are some solutions that our survey respondents came back to us with. I'm not going to go through them now because we need to get to breakout rooms, but if you join the breakout room 0 and we'll discuss this, we'll be going through these. So next slide. Yeah, so these are the types of questions we'll be, and keep going, Sean, these types of questions we'll be looking at in here. So yeah, this will be staying in the main Zoom with me. Great. So next slide, please. So elsewhere in the survey, we asked participants to rate 12 aspects of BNG from not a challenge to a significant challenge. And the 3 highest rated challenges were delivering BNG on-site, delivering BNG off-site, and monitoring enforcement. So firstly, on-site gains. Next slide, please. And we'll just skip over this. The key finding was that on-site gains were at risk of delivering poorer environmental benefits than off-site gains, with the reasons cited being, you know, on-site gains are often more in the hands of developers, some of whom might not take the appropriate care or have the appropriate expertise to implement and monitor them. They're more likely to be subject to loopholes, shortcuts, just being gamed. And there's a higher prevalence when you get to on-site of small or randomly situated pockets of gain sites instead of the larger joined up sites for nature favoured by the Lawton principles. And there's also the particular challenges faced by small sites trying to achieve on-site gains, which I'm just going to sum up as there's not enough space a lot of the time. But next slide, please. We'll just skip over the solutions one. And yeah, these are the types of questions that you'll be discussing if you join breakout room 1, which will be with Matt Beacon, who's the BNG technical lead at Mott MacDonald. And all our facilitators are kind of members of the BNG working group. So next slide, please. So offsite gains, the responses to this were really varied. Some were experiencing really serious problems, saying the market is broken, and others were saying it's working pretty well. But the key issue that did come up time and time again were that LPAs are not able to approve offsite units quick enough. And obviously that's really a capacity issue. However, many did see offsite gains as an easier and higher quality option than onsite gains when they could actually get them approved, if more expensive. So next slide, please. We'll skip over. And yeah, these are the questions that you'll be kind of discussing if you join breakout room 2, which will be with Dan Carpenter. Great. So I just see from Amy, can you pop the solutions into the chat? Yeah, all the facilitators will have the solutions so they can share them with you depending on which breakout room you go to. So monitoring and enforcement. So monitoring enforcement was brought up throughout the survey. You know, even when we didn't ask people about monitoring enforcement, they bring it up. And really, it's in discussions about BNG, you see it as their kind of elephant in the room. Are these gains actually going to be achieved in 30 years' time? Well, is anyone monitoring that? And is anyone enforcing that? Because if not, then it seems unlikely. So yeah, due to time, we'll just keep going. So yeah, if you want to discuss monitoring and enforcement, that will be breakout room 3 with Ian, who obviously gave the introduction, and these are the types of questions that you will be discussing. Okay, and finally, breakout room 4. We didn't get that much feedback, or it wasn't rated as, you know, one of the top 3 significant challenges, but the working group felt that integration with other schemes, BNG's integration with schemes such as local nature recovery strategies, and ELMS, and also, you know, the land use framework, which is due to be published now finally at the end of the year, was such an important one that we also wanted to include this. So if you want to discuss that, you'll be joining breakout room 4 with Dr. Tom Raven, who's a consultant at Eunomia. Eunomia are actually doing the evaluation for Natural England of BNG, or part of it at least. So yeah, I think Tom's a really good person to have speaking to about that.